Welcome to the Conversations with Cool People podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Absolute Natural Laundry Detergent, specifically designed for athletic garments, but gentle enough to use on all fabrics. Give stains and odor the good, clean fight with Absolute Natural Fiber Laundry Detergent. Absolutely safe in all washing machines. Absolutely safe on all fabrics. Absolutely effective in eliminating tough odors in all of your laundry. There's only one name in effective all-natural laundry detergent, and that's Absolute. Be clean. It's available for purchase on Amazon in the link provided below in the description, and there's free shipping for all Amazon Prime members on orders of 2 or more packs. This podcast is also brought to you by National Discount Merchant Services. Accept credit cards simply. Conversations with Cool People has partnered with National Discount Merchant Services to offer the guaranteed lowest rates, advanced payment technology, and 24/7 premier support 365 days out of the year. Pick a package and get started today and take your business to the next level with National Discount Merchant Services. Support this podcast and all future episodes by subscribing and using the links provided below to support the people who support us. I want to thank you for taking your time to join us on this conversation, and we hope that you enjoy the podcast. Okay. But yeah, and if you want to be a professional, all you need to do is get one of those slates, and you'll be all set.
I love the slate.
So you're saying the Wakanda, the Black Panther, you haven't seen it yet, but you're a big comic book buff.
Massively,
and
yes.
Do you intend on seeing it in the theater? You do, right?
You better believe it, no question.
What's taking you so long? The product, the expo.
Type A work personality, yeah. Total commitment to the work and family obligations. But yeah, I will definitely see it.
So yeah, like I was saying earlier, I think it's an important movie for what we know about traditional movie making of what I call what's going on under the hood. That a movie, totally produced, directed by by the black community,
right, was
always told, it won't sell. Right, so this is, Joel, he called me up. He's like, Jim, this is a movement. You got to see it. And this is after the second time he already saw it.
Oh, I love it.
So yeah, I saw it. I loved it. It was great. And I'm figuring, what's Mallardi going to think about this? I mean, you have like a cellar of comic books in your garage.
Oh yeah, I have upwards of probably 15,000 comic books.
Wow, and you're still actively collect?
Yes. As we speak right now, out in my office, the
vault?
Yeah, the vault. There are multiple boxes that I'm going through right now. Organizing, checking where my, what issues I'm missing, et cetera, et cetera. Literally, there's hundreds of comics right now just out of my office.
Wow.
Yeah, and about 15,000 in my home.
Now, is it merely just collecting, or are you actively involved in these storylines, or is it more of a little bit of both?
No, it's much more being engaged in the storyline. The way I started with comic books as a kid, growing up in New York, growing up in the Bronx, my Uncle John, who's an amazing story himself, he passed away last year at the age of 102. Ooh. He, World War II veteran, et cetera. He worked for the New York City Sanitation Department. And his trash route, used to take him past the Marvel Comics building on Madison Avenue.
Oh, wow.
In the early days of Marvel Comics, at the advent.
Now, is that the birthplace of Marvel? Are they in New York?
Yeah, it's Madison. I think it's still a Madison Avenue address. They
wow.
This little production office there. And he would actually, and to think about it now, because I know we threw some of these comics out, he used to get back then, comics were so undervalued in the scheme of things that they used to take the ones they couldn't sell and they would essentially put them in the trash. And my uncle, who was part of the sanitation department, would pick up these bundles of comics, and he started bringing them home to me. That was
the genesis, huh?
Yeah, my earliest recollection of reading comics, it was because of Uncle John, and this was when I was a little boy. So I'm going on 50 odd years now, 5 decades of being engaged in these storylines. So yeah, it's very much the narrative. It's the storyline. I've never for example, bought and then sold a comic. Every comic I've ever bought, I still own.
Oh, really? So you were never the collector seller?
No. The idea of parting with a comic is like a,
Wow.
that would be a major step for me. There's probably a 12-step program for.
So do you when you see some of these movies that come out that are Marvel brand or even DC, are you a Marvel DC guy or either?
Predominantly Marvel.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I grew up exclusively Marvel in terms of my comics reading.
But DC was first, right?
Yes, Detective Comics is older. DC Detective Comics is older than Marvel. Detective Comics started, I think, in the 1940s, 1930s. Marvel largely traces to the early 1960s.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it preceded it by, Superman, of course, right? It preceded Marvel by decades. Yeah.
So did you like the old Superman shows? The who was the first one? Was it Greg Reeves?
George Reeves. George Reeves. It's funny you mentioned that. I love the original Superman show. I remember I could name each of the characters, who played Jimmy Olsen, who played Lois Lane. And now, fast forward all these years later, we have our 2-year-old grandson comes over, and just a few nights ago, we were watching the Superman cartoons. I have the original, I think they were Max Fleischer, the original Superman cartoons from way back. They were amazing. The animation was like nothing you see today.
Really?
So yeah, I'm still watching that stuff. Literally.
And does it carry over into some of these TV shows? Like, I mean, it seems like now there's so many of them. The Smallville. Did you get
a little bit of Lois and Clark, a little bit of Smallville. It's tough though, having been reared on the comics. Even the Marvel movies, I have to say, the early Marvel movies. When you've grown up on these things and you know the storylines inside out and you know the depth and the sheer number of characters that have been in those comics over the years, and then you try to contain all that in a movie, in a specific 1.5, 2-hour script, I was kind of disappointed in the early Marvel films for that reason. And in some cases they changed the storyline, and you remember the storyline. To you, it's gospel. It's like your family history, and then they change it for the purposes of a cinematic representation, of the storyline, and so I took exception with a lot of I have to say a lot of the earlier filmed translations, because I'm all about the narrative flow.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to ask. It's with all of this, and that's exactly where I was getting at. Did it ever bother you? Were you one of those fans that, oh no, hell no, no, this Jimmy Olsen would never do anything like this, and just kind of fly off the lid? Would you lose it like that?
Yeah, no, I try
Grain
to
of salt.
keep it in check, but yeah, okay. There's definitely been points in time, where I took exception to the way, maybe the way a Marvel character was represented, but usually it's the storyline, some aspect of the storyline that they'll change, because some things just don't translate as well to a giant screen,
90 minutes,
representation. There's a lot of history there. And the other thing that I've kind of taken exception with, they seem to always want to restart these franchises. Like, it seems like Spider-Man has had 4 or 5 restarts. Batman has had multiple restarts, and I don't quite get that. Like, I would have, for example, I would be the happiest person alive if the Spider-Man film narrative, the last, 15 years or so, if they just had a succession of movies where they had a constant set of characters and then introduced, all the villains that we know and love. But instead of that, they just kept restarting the franchise.
Yeah, it's very strange. And I think that's where the business side comes in. It kind of overstepped the creative. Yeah. And I think you had Sony owned it. And then now it's Disney that owned it.
It went through multiple owners. Yep.
And I guess different directors who wanted to tell the Spider-Man story their own way.
Correct.
And as a Spider-Man fan, Spider-Man's my dude. I don't mind this current rebuild that's going on. Yeah. In fact, I'm kind of interested to see it, but I do like it. The one before that just agitated me.
Yeah.
They just rewrote the whole Uncle Ben thing. I don't know.
Yeah.
It was yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Wasn't a fan.
Yeah, I understand that. And I grew up as a Hulk guy. My character of choice, massive Spider-Man fan, but if I had to choose one character as a kid, it was the Hulk.
Yeah, that one seems to be the divide. You have ketchup, mustard, Hulk, Spider-Man. It's like
There's a lot of truth to that. Yeah, yeah. I was definitely a Hulk guy. There was just something about, like, Frankenstein always fascinated me, and the Hulk is similar to Frankenstein in certain, this tortured soul. Like, at the heart of that character, there's like, you think there's like a little boy there. There's like a child there, a tortured child. The Frankenstein monster took on that persona, and Hulk really embodied that as well.
So why did, I'm sorry to cut you off,
No, go ahead.
but early Hulks were purple. New Hulks are green.
His pants, you mean?
There's a story about that, isn't
Well,
there?
yeah, there's two issues. There's two issues. One was his skin tone originally was gray
Oh, okay.
before it became green. And the other issue is his pants. His pants were almost always purple in the early narrative. And I think at a point in time, that got flipped to another color.
They became blue jeans. Or was it the Lou Ferrigno
Perhaps,
stage?
yeah, it might have been Lou Ferrigno. But and the only letter I have ever written to a comic book publisher, and it was never, and this was back in the day when you wrote a letter, right? There was pre-internet, pre-everything, right?
Right.
So I physically, wrote a letter by hand, and I wrote to Marvel Comics asking why the Hulk was originally gray and then turned to green, and they never answered it. But years later, I discovered the answer. I think Stan Lee wrote about it, and it was much more utilitarian than I was expecting. It wasn't even a creative change. It was a publishing issue. They got the color wrong.
It was a technical.
Yes, the color mix in those early comics, they weren't able to represent the green the way it needed to be represented, so it came off as gray.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it had nothing to do with creative decisions. It was purely
Technology.
Yeah.
Technology couldn't keep up
You got
with the creative.
That's right.
So the cool thing about that is, especially with some of these newer movies, I kind of delved into comic books because I know you're such a buff, but a lot of those comics, like the X-Men stuff,
Yeah.
their premise, they're rooted in real life history. It's like World War II,
Yes.
and some of they kind of ripped our headlines from the headlines of World War II,
Yep.
which was the Avengers, or I'm sorry, the X-Men.
Yep.
How the whole Nazi experimentation created Wolverine. And
That's great.
The
Yep.
flying machines, all that. And then I think with the DC movie, I didn't know much about Wonder Woman, but in the Wonder Woman, she, they put her into the Civil War, I think, or World War I.
World War One. Yeah, exactly. Right.
But that seems to be two of your passions, is you're a history buff. And
Yeah.
that's what I've always loved. Man, when we used to work together,
Yep.
ComChoice,
Yep.
and then later Scope 7, it's like you and I happened to pull a lot of late nighters there. Like I remember,
Indeed, yeah.
I remember one time it was 2 a.m.
Yep.
I see your light on. I'm like, I go to look. I'm like, oh, Mark, you're here. Hey, what's up, Jim? And we'd
too
end up
true.
talking like a good solid 90 minutes,
I know.
just about anything under the moon at that time. But what I was always impressed with was your historical knowledge.
Thank you.
And kind of leading with the comic books, it's like there is a lot of common overlap.
Yeah.
Where they make a narrative
Yeah.
out of actual real world happenings,
Absolutely.
current events, past events. Well, even with the Black Panther movie right now, there's a very real, very current narrative
Yep.
about the country of Wakanda. And not no spoilers or anything, but once you see it, the narrative's intact. And going back to our real history, it's like here we are in a situation to where the more things change, the more things stay the same. And in our conversations, I've always been very intrigued by how you're able to kind of weave the past history into how it applies today.
Thank you.
And let's talk about that a little bit.
Sure.
Because I know you're very vocal about the things that are going on, but you've been able to put together, like you told me, some sort of, you have your own podcast.
Right.
It's called Unprecedented.
Right.
And you were talking about some of, what was it, the oil, like something about the oil trade or the oil barons of the past.
Yeah, correct. The Teapot Dome
Teapot Dome scandal. That's what it was.
Right. That's actually a really, you're spot on regarding the fact that we need to learn from history, right? There's very few things, frankly, that happen in the here and now that haven't happened before in some fashion, that haven't manifested before. And only by studying the past and what we've done right, what we've done wrong, my belief, are we able to just improve as a society and to not make the mistakes we made before.
Sure. And explain, what is the Teapot Dome scandal?
Yeah, essentially, under the Warren G. Harding administration, a president that most folks are probably not all that familiar with, Warren G. Harding was a what you could best call like a compromise candidate in terms of his election to be president. He came out of a hotly contested presidential election where there was no clear front runner, and as a result, his party negotiated a settlement, and out of that settlement came Warren G. Harding, who was a very kind of milquetoast, middle of the road kind of guy. He wasn't a real opinionated guy. He was a likable guy. He was a good-looking guy, and he was very non-controversial, or at least they thought going in. And he was from Ohio. The preponderance of presidents in U.S. history have been from Ohio.
So even, oh, really?
Yeah.
And it's funny because even now it's like Ohio. It always seems to come down to Ohio. So
Yes.
the influence of Ohio is still very, relevant to this day.
Yeah, absolutely it is. It's if you trace back historically, you look at the map first of all, especially the map as it existed all those years ago. Ohio was like the middle part of America. It was the middle point between East and West. It was more or less the middle point between North and South.
It was the legitimate Midwest at that time.
Yes, in every sense of the word, right? So as a result, candidates that came from Ohio were often looked upon as being non-controversial because they weren't Easterners, they weren't Westerners, they weren't Southerners, they weren't Northerners, all of which had connotations associated with them. So they became these kind of compromise candidates, these acceptable candidates. And Warren G. Harding was one of those guys. And sure enough, he gets he wins he's put up to run. He wins the presidency. And unfortunately, what happened was Warren G. Harding, being a very hands-off type of president, he brought in many of his political cronies and many of his best friends and folks from the old neighborhood in Ohio into high positions of government. Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense. He basically brought his cronies in, and he didn't look over their shoulder to nearly to the extent that he should have been looking over their shoulder. He didn't mind the store, and as a result, his administration, up until recent times, has widely been acknowledged as the most corrupt presidential administration in history. And the Teapot Dome scandal that we alluded to before was an oil scandal. There were massive oil reserves that had historically been under the jurisdiction of the Secretary of the Navy, because in wartime, you needed oil, right? Everything was powered by oil. So a part of the strategic U.S. oil reserve was purposefully under the jurisdiction of the Navy for use in time of war. After the war ended, that need went away. So there was going to be a bidding process by which different companies were going to come in and bid on those strategic reserves. And what happened was
to put back into the civil sector.
Exactly, okay. Exactly for civilian production of gas and oil.
Because now it's surplus. You're no longer in wartime, so they were trying to bring it back to the economy.
You got it exactly. And what happened under Harding, again, with his lack of oversight, to say the least, they ended up, one of those reserves, which was called Teapot Dome because the rock formation under which the oil reside looked very much like a teapot. Literally, it has that kind of geographical feature to it. And what happened was instead of having an open, fair bidding system, may the highest bidder win, they controlled the process. There was corruption. There was graft involved. And the Secretary of the Interior, I believe it was, apparently took a whole pocket full of change to award the bid to a particular company. And the way it came out was he unfortunately started to live high on all the dirty money that he had gotten as a result. And I think he had a ranch in New Mexico, and he started adding to his ranch.
This is during his presidency.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It was what happened was it started during his presidency. He passed away in office. He had a premature death, and then it followed his administration afterwards. And I believe to date in history, that Secretary of the Interior, his name escapes me, he's the only cabinet minister in the history of the U.S. that served a jail term. They ultimately indicted him in the corruption scandal around Teapot Dome, and they jailed him. And I think to date, he is the only current or past cabinet holder in U.S. government history that went to jail.
Wow, really? That's amazing.
Yeah.
When, it's kind of a given that to get that high in the political system, chances are you have some dirt under your fingernails, and, all these years. So Warren G. Hardie, he was World War I era?
He was, the sequence of events, he was between World War I and World War II.
Okay, so
it was
fresh
just
off of-
after World War I. That's
Okay.
correct. That's correct. Yeah.
And it's, so we're talking 1920s.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. 1920s.
And to think that with all the corruption, all the scandals that have happened up to this very day, that no one has ever gone to jail.
I know.
That's amazing.
Yeah, in cabinet members. Cabinet
Cabinet
right?
members,
Like
okay.
in Watergate, I think something like 40 odd, if I remember correctly, individuals from the Nixon administration ultimately were given jail sentences, but none of those were
None of
were
them
cabinet.
served.
Well,
None of them
none of those were
cabinet.
cabinet members.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
See, I guess
Exactly.
our generation, it's like the Watergate is the most fresh scandal that everyone alludes to, especially with what's going on right now with the
Right.
whole investigation of our current presidency.
Right.
But I think even the generation before us, it's like right before Kennedy, you had was it the Bay of Pigs? I mean, that's a
yeah.
scandal. That
Cuba.
was blown open,
Yep.
and
Yep.
I guess that predates Watergate, but I'm sure that's pretty Watergate level stuff to where, people run false flags or these things that have been uncovered that no one goes to jail for. And it's kind of amazing when you think about it.
Yeah.
And, and kind of seeing what's going on right now with the investigation. I mean, in my adult life,
Right.
I've never seen anything like this. I only know through books or through folks that were more astute in following
Sure.
what was going on with Watergate.
Right.
In fact, there was something that I remember you saying that undid Nixon. It was something that was captured on a recording. He said one simple sentence that
Yeah.
just kind of brought down his whole.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. When it finally came out that there were tapes, Nixon routinely, I think from the start of his presidency, had installed a recording system in the Oval Office. And he operated it by a push button on his desk. So the minute somebody came in, sat down, unbeknownst to them, only his closest confidants knew he was recording. So he recorded every comment. So he'd hit the button and he'd record everything. So he had hours and hours and days, worth of tapes. So when the Watergate break-in happened and the subsequent scandal and all, at some point in the investigation, and I think it was John Dean, Nixon's counsel, the White House counsel, I think he's the one that first revealed the existence of the tapes in when he was testifying to Congress, right? Mm-hmm. So it became clear that the tapes were out there. Then there was, a year plus battle, legal jockeying back and forth of getting Nixon to turn over the tapes. So finally, he was forced to turn the tapes over. And there is a point in one of the tapes where Nixon is engaged in discussion with one of his lieutenants, either John Ehrlichman or Haldeman, one or the other. Mm-hmm. And they're talking about all the corruption that was going on, and we're going to have to pay off this one, we're going to have to pay off that one.
And he's rolling his own tape at this point.
Yeah, that's right. Amazingly, he's rolling tape while this discussion is happening. It's just the two of them in the Oval Office, but still he was recording it. Mm-hmm. And during that discussion, Nixon doesn't say a word. Like it's the one guy talking. It's Ehrlichman or Haldeman talking and saying, yeah, we're going to have to. They're threatening to go public with this. They can expose us. We have to pay them. They want X thousands of dollars, and then he goes down the narrative path. Here's how I think we should handle it. And he says we need to do X, Y, and Z. All Nixon says is
No way.
not even yes, and that simple acknowledgement was damning to him. When Congress got a hold of that, it was clear that he wasn't resisting this plot. He was actively engaged in it to the point where he was acknowledging the next steps that his lieutenants were going to have to take to keep the whole thing covered up.
Wow.
So it was
that was the only thing on tape.
Yes, in that give and take, it was the simple, That was the incriminating,
Wow.
Imagine, yeah.
I mean, it just showed he was in the room.
Right.
He was part of the discussion.
You got it, exactly.
Wow.
And he was acknowledging that this and that had happened, and now they're going to do all these corrupt things to cover it up.
Wow, that's amazing. There was a I don't know if you've ever seen it, and a lot of people will probably scoff at it because it was, I guess, written and produced, directed by Oliver Stone.
Okay.
But it was The Making of America. Have you ever seen that series? It's on Netflix.
I have, yeah.
It's incredible. I haven't watched the whole thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating, actually.
It goes over the dynamics between the Carnegies and the Rockefellers and how those factions would just go at it. And
yes.
Then, and then there was some other family. I can't. It's been a while since I've seen it.
Yeah.
Did you ever get into that? Like I know you're really into the politics, the historical politics, and even war, like some of the war history.
Yeah, the military, right.
How about some of the founding of America?
Yeah.
Are you into that?
Yeah, very much so. My kind of the journey I've been on, to your point, like you mentioned, comic books, and in similar fashion, I've loved history since I was a little boy. And, I think I've told you this story before. The first two books I remember purchasing as a boy, it was Scholastic Book Services in third grade or something like that. I was probably 7, 8 years old.
Yeah, a little mail order.
Yeah, exactly. The SBS, you fill them out. And I still have these two books out in my office. One is The Battle of Britain, which was the Blitz during World War II, and the other was a George S. Patton. It was on General Patton. So those are the first two books I ever purchased, were like heavy-duty military history books, as a grade schooler.
Third grader.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was third grade, no later than fifth. I think it was third or so. So I've had that history bug, literally since I was a boy. I took a lot of history courses in college. I didn't major in it, but I almost minored in it. And I took economics courses and I took history courses. And my love for history just runs really deep. So as an adult, most of the reading that I've done, I started with the World War II era. That's my dad and my Uncle John, who I mentioned before. They were both World War II veterans. So I started there. That was my original interest. And then I worked back chronologically to World War I, the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, etc., the Crimean War. So now I have a research library.
The library is incredible.
Thank you. It's definitely my passion. It's organized by section of military history. So I was kind of on that path of military history, and then at a point in time, I got into like the founding of America and the building of America. And that series you mentioned, which is amazing, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies.
Vanderbilts, that was the
right?
other name I was looking
Goulds, they were all those families that started the Henry Ford, for that matter, right? The automotive business, the steel business, the railroads, steam engines, and the steamboat trade. I find that fascinating, and it's like very rough and tumble history. These guys were rough guys. They were competitors, like to the extreme. Type A personalities, you know what I mean? They were monopolists, if you want to call them that. They were monopolists, and they were almost like royalty. They were almost like the American equivalent of royal families, and they did a lot of things that were, as
not
you said,
so royal.
Yeah, they're right. They dirt under the nails, like you said before, but. But they did literally build modern America.
Yeah, and to that, something that's kind of always amazed me. Have you been in downtown LA recently?
Within the past couple of years,
Past couple of years, but not in the last year?
Possibly not. I hate to say it, but possibly not. Oh,
man. So, likewise, I haven't really been there. But right now, there is a huge renaissance going on in Los Angeles.
Architecturally?
Yeah,
right.
Which it's It's amazing. Downtown LA is looking brand new with all the buildings going up. The skyline is changing.
Boy.
And I think it started with the Marriott, when the Marriott Hotel was built there.
Yeah.
Man, I was there just a few months ago. And, Emila and I, we were just in shock. Her, even more so. She's like, I can't believe it. She couldn't let it go. She couldn't let it go. We started Googling it. And it's the largest building renaissance since the 20s.
Wow.
It's like it's brand new. It's like the Wild West again.
Boy, I hadn't quite realized that. That's impressive.
Yeah, take a trip over there. Make a day out of it. Go and see some of the new shops, restaurants, whatever. But it's just amazing. And it's inspiring to see, because the point I was getting at is, for years, ever since I was a kid, I drive on the 405, drive on the 101, and even that little stretch of the 110 where it's the old freeway. It's only like two lanes. It's scary as all hell to get on, you know?
Yep.
But I remember when I was young, my mom taking me on that freeway, and she was saying, this is the original freeways before all the other freeways. And I was like, whoa. And it looks old. It looks its age. But when you think of your drive to Vegas, or when you're driving around town, it's like all this infrastructure. It's amazing what got done, and especially where you're from. You're a New Yorker, right?
Yeah.
Was it the Bronx? Or?
Yeah, I grew up in the Bronx. Many years in the Bronx. Yeah.
And when I see New York, which is the original colonies where they were developing stuff. But it's just amazing to see the development, all those skyscrapers.
Yes.
And then all the way out here, I grew up on the West Coast to see the aqueducts, all these roads, it's the concrete, the high rises. But none of it really made in my generation.
Gotcha.
Like the only thing I really remember seeing is the 105. I remember the 105 getting built.
Yep.
And I remember that section of the 210, like over around Upland, or where they opened up the 210 to go all the way through to wherever it goes now. But the point is all the innovation, all of the infrastructure, everything that was being built, telephone poles, water lines, built before my time, but during my time, and I'm no spring chicken these days, but I've never seen that renaissance around where I live, in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah. Understood. It's that whole history, urban history, architectural history, is fascinating. Just the building of New York, to that point, right? New York, as you said, goes back much further than Los Angeles does. And it's got its own, history relative to, urban sprawl, the first developments. Again, the generation we were talking about, the Carnegies, the Vanderbilts, who, built the foundations for, this super city.
Yeah, it's like maniacal, the pace. The Empire State Building was built, I think, in 11 months. I don't know of any other like structure or project that gets done that quick.
Right. It's hard to believe. Yeah, absolutely. And thinking of Los Angeles, as you said, I grew up in the Bronx. Lived in New York about 30 years. Moved out to California for a job-related move in 1991. So I've been out here, quite a while now. And one thing I noticed when I first moved to California was that, or at least Los Angeles, much of the infrastructure as we now know it, and especially the commercial infrastructure, the businesses, so much that is current LA started and grew up after World War II. And I did some examination of history around that, and it seems that a lot of guys that went to war, especially in the Pacific theater of war, right? They went through California or through Hawaii, went and fought in World War II, came back, settled in California. Like you look at Carl's Jr., look at all these fast food establishments, most of the chain restaurants that you see here, look at their date of origin. In many, many cases, it's 1945, 1946, 1947, 1949, post-World War II. It's all these guys from Ohio and other parts of the U.S. who came through California to go fight the war, came back, and they settled in California.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So a large part of Southern California history, as we currently know it, especially the commercial aspects of it, World War II was the catalyst. Like World War II displaced whole populations. You had millions of mostly men at that point, going around the world, right, to fight this horrible war. And it like guys that never would have gotten out of, as an example, Oklahoma or Kansas or Indiana. Now they're traveling the world. Now they're over in Japan. They're over in Germany. My father's an example. My father, he went over 6 days after D-Day, D+6 in World War II. He was part of the Patton's Third Army. So he went through France. He went through Belgium into Germany ultimately. Now this year he'll be 95 years old. He's never gone outside of the U.S. since then. That was the only time in his life he went outside the U.S. He's only flown once in his life. The only time he flew was
wartime.
No, he didn't fly in the war. He flew to California I got married, to see my marriage.
Oh, wow.
He flew to be present at my marriage. That was the only time in his life he's flown. So, he took a ship over to England.
Okay.
And then he took, over the channel. So he's a perfect example. There's a guy that never would have gotten outside of New York, certainly not outside of the U.S. if it wasn't for the war, right?
Wow.
And there's millions of guys where that exact thing happened. So it displaced and it opened up the world. It opened up a lot of people to the world. It gave them a taste of what's out there. And Southern Cal, in large part, grew up around that post-World War II experience.
Wow, that's a great point.
Yeah, I find it fascinating. Just as you walk down the street, look at the date of origin of most of the businesses.
Yeah.
You're going to see post-World War II. Yeah, without question.
Wow. So in fact, to that little factoid, I just found out. I watched that documentary about McDonald's. Or no. I'm sorry, it's not a documentary. It's with Tom Hanks. He plays.
Was that the Ray Kroc?
Yeah. I think that was that it. Kroc. Oh shoot!
He was the founder of McDonald's, Ray Kroc.
Yeah, and I'm thinking maybe that's the name of the movie. It's called The Founder, something like that. Anyways, Tom Hanks, he plays Ray Kroc.
Okay. Right.
And he meets the McDonald brothers and all that stuff, and through that, I just found out the McDonald's right down the street from my house is the original McDonald's.
Oh, is that true?
Well, depending on who you ask, because once Ray Kroc took over, I think he was from Indiana.
Probably, yeah. There you go, yeah.
Like any conquering faction, a lot of the history was erased. So there's like this, I guess, argument or debate about that Monrovia McDonald's,
okay,
or the one in Indiana.
Oh, is that true?
Because technically it was called Arrow Burger or something like that before, because it was Arrow Highway. I don't know what the significance is, but I stepped foot in McDonald's for the first time right after I saw that, which was last year, for the first time in 12 years.
Wow.
No, second time. I had to take a pit stop one time, But I saw it, and then they have a little commemorative plaque in there. And I always thought, it's like, man, that's too cool. Bad I don't need McDonald's. This is a nice McDonald's right here. Man, this looks like all retro and everything.
Yeah.
No, it's the original
Literally.
McDonald's.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love
so
it.
That's kind of cool. So next time you're in the area, I don't
know
if you want nostalgia, just go ahead and swing through. But
that's great.
But yeah, with all that, the war, how it displaced families, and I mean, I guess that was a surge. And how there's that fast food infrastructure, but how, man, it just seemed like the generation before us really pushed infrastructure a whole lot more. And here we go, fast forward to today. These are topics that are kind of haunting us today, because now you hear that on the forefront. Is like our infrastructure is, I mean, I remember being little. I don't remember there's so much talk about the infrastructure as there is now. But now knowing what I know, it's like, we kind of want to take care of these things. But yet it seems like the budget's always short for something. That's an issue. And it's like, you going back to Warren G. Hardy, the culture of corruption. And it's like, where are we now? Because you do hear a lot of stuff about what's going on with this presidency this administration. But corruption is not new to this administration. It was, it was happening, the administration before him. I mean, it's a history. No,
Yeah, there's
everyone's
always
dirty.
been some undercurrent of that. Yeah, right.
I know one of the big things for you is you are very dedicated and very active within animal communities. You work with the local shelters.
Right, SPCALA. Yeah, correct.
And environmental issues.
Yeah.
Now, through your education and the things that you've learned, you've been pretty much a lifelong Republican, right? Is that how you were raised, or?
No, well, interestingly, no, that's not how I was raised. My dad, who I mentioned will be 95 this year, he was a Depression era, baby. Mm-hmm. He, proudly blue collar family.
Bus driver.
Yeah, my dad drove a city bus in Manhattan, Harlem, the Bronx for 35 years, and then he drove a school bus for another 15 years after that. So a real blue collar union family, strong union family. So my dad has always been a dyed in the wool Democrat. Very very liberal. Surprisingly, frankly, from where we came from, the neighborhood, very very liberal guy and Democrat. When I, started out in the business world, I aligned largely with the Republican philosophy in a lot of respects, as it related to business, open markets, freedom of markets, capitalism, et cetera. A lot of my leanings were more Republican than Democrat back in the day. So up until last year, frankly, I was a registered Republican. I always voted with my head.
Okay. So you weren't a party first guy.
Correct. I never voted strict party line. That's right. I kind of put my head and my heart into the equation, and let the person who is most representative of the issues that I care about win. Was the way I went about it. So I was a Republican all those years, but again, came from a blue collar household. And speaking of animal rights and environmental rights, my dad is especially for his generation and his age, was really progressive that way. He was always an animal guy. It's funny, we didn't grow up with a lot of animals. I didn't have a dog until I was in my 30s, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah, dogs and cats were not in our field of vision as a kid. I had turtles and pigeons and little things like that. But my dad was always a real caretaker for animals. I remember in the wintertime, if we had a really deep snowfall in New York, and we had some rough winters, I remember so clearly my dad literally would shovel a path. He would do the driveway and the normal stuff, but then in the backyard, he would shovel a path from our back door to the bird feeder to make sure he filled up the bird feeder and that the squirrels and the birds were taken care of.
Oh, wow. Really?
I remember that so clearly. He would shovel a path, and then he would sprinkle bird seed on the ground, and then he had certain things he'd give to the squirrels. He made sure those animals were taken care of in the deep winter. And that left it was a profound impact on me and memory that I have. And I think in part, even though we weren't a family that had a lot of animals around, the circumstances just didn't permit it. I grew up with a real love of animals. Like another thing I distinctly remember, we would watch like National Geographic, and we would watch Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom. That's a show that used to be on Sunday nights, hosted by Marlon Perkins, and he would go out into the wild and he would expose you to all these animals. And I remember my dad always taking it so hard when the lion, the predator, would catch the prey.
Oh.
Imagine, really? Like an antelope or wildebeest, whatever it might have been. My dad he would almost want to turn the television off. He took it so hard when that lion caught the prey, right? Mm-hmm. And that gave me a real soft spot for wildlife and for animals and for nature, growing up. So yeah, I've kind of, in addition to my passion for history, comic books, and things like that, I've had a passion for animals, and for the environment, writ large. Inclusive of wildlife. I've had a real passion and a real soft spot for that. And kind of tying a couple of topics here together, back to the issue of history, the infrastructure and the ecology programs. Much of both of those things, really, when you get down to it, trace to the Depression and Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR's New Deal programs. Right, we were in the worst depression, still in probably in world history, right? And it had gone on for years, and FDR came into office, famously said, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." And, he instilled, a backbone back into the population. And he got to work and he passed legislation that was revolutionary. The electrification of much of America, running electrical power, happened because of an organization he created called the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, and they harnessed the waterways of America to generate electricity that they took to all the rural areas of the country. So they electrified homes as a result of FDR's programs. He put people to the national highway system. The national highway system that we have, those highways you were talking about, right, that span all across America, the advent of those was the New Deal programs, where they put people to work by having them build roadways, build infrastructure, rail lines. Many rail lines were put in place at that point. And they created the Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC, where they employed all these destitute folks in urban areas to plant trees, Whole forests were planted and devastated areas were reforested by the Civilian Conservation Corps during the Depression as a result of FDR's New Deal programs. So it was his way of putting millions of people to work because the unemployment was off the charts, right? People were destitute. He put them to work, but he put them to work in constructive ways, building the infrastructure, the national highway system, bridges and tunnels. Many of the tunnels that we famously know in New York were built around that time period. And he put people to work in the Forestry Service, the Civilian Conservation Corps, helping to preserve our natural resources.
So government programs.
Yes, like by today's standards, with the conservative mindset that we have, people would look upon that almost as like socialism. Like, gee, that's communistic. And in a way, it was very so. But we needed those types of social programs because America was at its lowest point economically, unemployment-wise, et cetera. We needed a solution. We needed some hard, fast solutions. And in comes Roosevelt. He institutes passes these major pieces, landmark pieces of legislation. But we're still, the Social Security system was created. Child labor laws were created at that point. The Social Security net, the welfare programs that we now have, what we now know is like Medicaid and Medicare, all those programs have their roots in the Depression-era programs that the FDR administration put out. So I mention all that because it brings some of these themes together, because he had a big ecology, preservation of the natural resources component, and he had a big progressive component of building up urban centers, building up the infrastructure of this country. So kind of fast forward to your point a moment ago, right? When you and I were growing up, I'm a baby of the 60s, right? Mm-hmm. At that point, all that infrastructure was still fairly new. The Depression was the 30s, so it was only 30 years old at that point. Look at where we are now, right? Now we're in 2018. That infrastructure that was created in 1933 is pretty darn old.
Yeah, it's falling apart.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why we legitimately, anybody who travels extensively around the U.S., we've got a lot of work in front of us: bridges, tunnels, train lines, et cetera. There is a bit of crumbling of the infrastructure going on.
And stagnation. It's like, up until this recent, skyline redevelopment of LA, it's like, you see the Burj Khalifa over in Dubai.
Yes.
You see
Yes.
Shanghai just explode with their new buildings.
Amazing. Yep.
And technology. It's like, man, where is ours? Where is this push that at the rate in which it used to happen, to where, again, I'm very fortunate to have been born on this plot of dirt to where all this was already made. So,
right.
But not to say I don't appreciate it, because yes, I have traveled. I have seen other areas to where you see it developing and cool. It seems like they're on the right path, but you just see other countries. It's like, whoa, we don't have this, and we're USA. We're number one. We should, I grew up thinking that we are the bleeding edge of technology. We invent, we create, and even with our social structure, it's like, for better or for worse, we're more of a consumer country now, to where all that industry has fled, for better or for worse. I don't know how good that is. I don't know how bad that is.
Yeah.
Because, I do believe in technology, and I know that technology has really essentially outsourced a lot of old employment, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
and it's good and bad. I understand that, but at the same time, I liken it to back when they used to hire lamplighters to go around and light lamps on the street.
Yeah,
That
right.
that was a job.
Absolutely, yes,
But
it was.
with these electrical lights that turn on automatically
Right.
at dusk, it's like, well, oh, you just killed the industry. You killed jobs. It's like, well, yeah, but it's
Yeah.
called evolution. We have to evolve. We can't just
Yeah.
dumb down our progress just for the sake of jobs.
Yeah. It's a great.
So it's a double-edged sword.
It is. It's a great point, and it's particularly relevant right now. Just as one small example, this interest in reviving the coal industry. Wow, that is one of the stranger platforms I've heard in a long time.
Yeah, which and then in this administration, it seems like there are moves that have been made that kind of it's a direct slap in the face of the environment,
Yeah.
of progress, of the lamplighter. To me, that's my standard of that's what I know, or film developers.
Yeah.
People who develop film. It's like in this age of digital cameras, it's like
Absolutely.
technology has moved on, and there's always resistance to new technology. And I get that.
Yeah.
That's just kind of a human error. Well, I mean, for whatever reasons. I mean, it's evolved through primitive times to always be wary of things that are new because
Right.
it could be a threat, right? But I remember when digital cameras were a thing, man, the purists fought it tooth and nail. Oh, it'll never, I remember they would specifically say, it will never be film. It will never be film. Yeah, part of that's good, but yeah, the other part of it is, it won't ever be film, but not to say it won't be better than film.
That's
But there's that mentality on progress and change. We're
Yeah.
creatures of habit.
Yeah.
And that going back to the coal, it's like, yeah, I understand there is a segment of society, not that they're forgotten, but it'd be nice to see programs to where step your game up, guys, step your game up.
Yeah.
And I say that with the most compassion,
Absolutely. And again, growing up in a union blue collar household, I'm exceedingly sensitive, to the plight of, the ordinary worker. My family are those ordinary workers.
Sure,
right?
sure.
Everybody in my orbit were those ordinary workers. Most of my friends that, from back in my days in New York, they're FedEx drivers and, postal service workers, reputable, stable professions. That's the way I've always been acclimated. But yeah, there comes a point where in the evolution of a society, in the advancement of knowledge, progress, etc., some things you have to leave behind. Sometimes, moving on is for the better. And this whole train of thought is, again, exceedingly relevant because there's been numerous times in the history of the world when they call them reactionary movements, right? You have revolutions where, which theoretically push things forward at a much, an accelerated pace and break down the social order, break down the norms. And then you have reactionary, and the term reactionary by, dictionary standards means, those who push back against change, often just on an emotive basis. Like there's no logical basis for pushing back and trying to stop the change from occurring. In a lot of cases, it's very emotively driven, very emotionally based, but they push back. And we are seeing that, I think, in a very pronounced way right now in this country. We've had we had our first African-American president, Barack Obama. We almost had our first female president. We've had these amazing advancements that my dad thought he wouldn't see in his lifetime. 20 years ago, he would have said, "Oh, in my lifetime, I probably won't see an African-American president." When Barack Obama got elected, I visited my dad down in Florida, and then he said, I want to live long enough to see a woman.
Oh, wow.
Right? And he almost, right? We almost got there, right? We still have time, right?
Right.
So
How old is he now?
he'll be 95 this September. This September, right? So we as a society, and think of women's rights, think of minority rights, think of Think of the inclusiveness that we have now that we didn't have before, the tolerance and diversity that we have now, the influx of immigrants into this country. In my mind, it's all good, and it's all part of the natural evolution of a society. If you choose to remain, parochial and insulated, you don't advance, right? You ultimately have blinders on. It's the consummate, living in the ivory tower and not being able to look outside of the box. So in my estimation, all the things that brought us to the point we're at now are good. They're natural advancements of a society. They're in my estimation, they're signs of a healthy society, embracing all these cultures from around the world. Anybody who works in business, as you have, as I do now, when you walk into a company, let's say, one of my clients might be Nestle. You walk into Nestle, and Nestle is so incredibly diverse as to the nationalities you'll see represented in any conference room when you're meeting. These are a group of, there might be 20 people in there, and those 20 people are from 8 to 10 different countries. And it's wonderful. That diversity of knowledge, skill set, that infusion of culture, in my mind, invariably a better product is going to come out of the discussion that happens among those 20 people than if I chose, 20 people who were born and raised in South Dakota and never got out of their little town. Not to say that, there's not a place for that, but I believe, using the business world that that I've been in for many, many years as a model, the companies that have stayed contemporary, stayed current, the companies that have advanced, the companies that have always kept a leg up on the competition, were those companies who were open-minded, who embraced change, who didn't take a reactionary stance and try to push back and force the country, force society back into the 1950s. Mm-hmm. They realized it's inevitable. Change is going to happen. It's how you react to it and how you embrace it that's going to make all the difference as to whether you're left by the wayside or whether you are ultimately successful. So long story short, I think there's a need for us to recognize that time does move on, that society does progress. And that's been the case for hundreds of years. And if you look at where we're at right now, as a society, as a planet, right now, the world is more diverse than it ever was before. The world is actually significantly safer than it has been at any point in recorded human history. Yeah. There are less people on any given day in a military situation or at risk of their lives on a daily basis right now than there have been at any point in recorded human history. So we're doing something right. Like collectively, the world is flat. We're coming together. Much progress has been made.
Wait, the world is flat? Wait, did you just creep into a flat earth? Are you the flat earther?
Not a flat earther, no. Okay. No. Only in the sense of the world is smaller than it ever has been.
Okay. Whoa, you're about to blow away everything I just
no.
held you in high esteem about.
Yeah, not to worry. No.
But yeah, diversity in culture brings diversity in ideas.
Absolutely.
And I really think, I'm a homer, man. I love America.
Sure. Same here.
And I think that alone is what makes, this country great, or any environment. Let's just take it out of nationalism. Just any environment where there's a diversity of culture and ideas and a tolerance for same cultures and ideas.
Absolutely.
It just puts you in a better position for advancement and just optimal, whatever, performance, living, whatever you want to call it.
Agreed.
And you've seen a lot of that with a lot of the work you've done. I mean, you spent years as an executive in educational fields, right?
Yeah, I've kind of had through 3 lives from a business standpoint, from a career standpoint. The bulk of my career has been in the food and beverage industry. I worked for PepsiCo back in New York. And for a decade, I was with a company called Information Resources, Inc., who is a major, they're a competitor to Nielsen. So they're a major research organization whose clients are the Nestle's and the Procter & Gamble's and the PepsiCo's. So I worked for them for about a decade. So that whole aspect of my career has been working largely in a marketing and a market research capacity in the consumer packaged goods industry, which is the food and beverage industry in the U.S. So that's one career. You're right. I spent a period of time where I was in the educational industry, mostly on the digital education side of the spectrum, and then the company where we met, which was essentially Hollywood digital production, was kind of my third career. But the bulk of my 30 odd years now has been spent on in the food and beverage industry.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay. So.
And you had there was one that always intrigued me. I always forgot the name, but they were like it was some sort of cognitive or brain studies of the mind and how it works or something like that.
Yeah.
That was very interesting.
Yeah.
What was that about?
Truly, this was a company.
Real quick.
Company I was with for a number of years. They were a startup company, and the field was called neuromarketing, and it's much bigger now than it was then. This is now going back about 10 years or so. And we had a device that was essentially if you can picture like a Velcro enclosure headband, like a John McEnroe, kind of tennis head, and built into it were medical grade EEG sensors, medical grade EEG equipment. Electroencephalography. I always butcher saying that word, but so these were sensors that were built into there, an array of sensors, and what we were doing was the sensors were receiving brain signals. So we were processing. So we would expose a person to a print ad, to a book, to a television advertisement, to a package of a bottle or a food package, and we, without them saying a word, we would be receiving their brain signal. They're from their frontal lobe, and we knew from the signal. And then this device was communicating wirelessly to our server, and we would capture their brain signal. And we knew two things. Number one, were they cognitively processing on what they were seeing? Were they thinking about it? Right. So they're looking at the ad and they're thinking about it. So we knew that they were cognitively firing. Number one. Number two, we knew they were emotively reacting to it. We used to call it attraction aversion. They were kind of either leaning in mentally to it, meaning they liked it, or they were like repulsed by it. So we knew if they were turned off by it or they were drawn in, and were they thinking about it. So yeah, at the time it was a brand new field of market research. Now it's very commonly used by most of the major food and beverage companies in the nation.
Wow.
Yeah, and the beauty of it is the person didn't have to say a word. Instead of a focus group where you're asking people, what do you think of this product? What do you think of this package design? In this case, we would speak with them afterwards. So we did get their articulation of it later on. But the first thing we were cueing in on literally was whether they were processing on it or not.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you in part are to thank for all the spam I get of. One day I'll be talking about something. Hey, babe, look at this hamburger stand. This is a great place. And next thing you know, I'm on my computer and I see advertisements for In-N-Out. But no, that's what I'm talking about. It's like you're always involved in some really cool things. I remember stepping into your office. You had these cool packages of. I guess it was like prototypes.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
Prototypes are always fun because
Yep.
it's not stuff you see. You see familiar products and logos and brands
Yep.
in unfamiliar packaging. So I always thought that was interesting. But
it's part of that theme of embracing new ideas. Like neuromarketing was brand new. I remember when I first got the phone call from the recruiter about this, because that's when I had segued out of the industry for a while. That's when I was in the industry with you in digital production. I got the phone call. I'm like, wow, that technology really exists, and sure enough, it existed. So that was a perfect example of innovating, embracing something new. Yeah, it was a little bit alien. It was a little bit bleeding edge at the time. Maybe a little bit scary. They're reading my brain signals, but it had value, and we proved the value, and now it's here to stay.
Well, and now you're into some really cool stuff to where it blends, I think, a lot of your worlds of not seeing animals getting eaten by other animals, or I should say your dad, but you're into the food industry again.
Yes, right.
But it's a more environmentally conscious segment of the food industry.
Yeah, very much so. Right.
you guys, you're part of a group that hosts the two largest food expos, natural food expos.
Correct.
Is it in the world, in the nation?
Definitely in the nation, and probably among the largest in the world.
It's insanely large.
Yeah.
I've been going to these events. It's called the Natural Food Expo.
Yeah,
right?
Natural Food Expo West and Natural
East.
Food Expo East. Yeah,
which
exactly.
is held in Baltimore around fall time in September.
Correct. The East show is September in Baltimore, and the West show is this month, March, in Anaheim, out here in California.
Yeah,
That's
which
right.
I will be attending. Thank you very much for the passes. But it's something that I'm conscientious about. I try to be about what I put into my body. I wasn't always that way, but once you start getting up there in age, it's like,
Oh yeah,
I got to change some things.
Yeah.
But now you are actually a part of some of the decision makers that gets to put these new ideas
Right.
of food consumption, which takes into consideration it has environmental considerations, and
Big
it
time.
seems like it's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah.
Those things, and
Indeed.
what does that involve nowadays? What are you up to with
Well,
all that?
It is pretty fascinating, and as I mentioned, I spent all those years in the conventional food industry, right? With your traditional, food and beverage brands that we all know and love, that we grew up with, right? And then fast forward now, I've been in my current field, my current occupation, about 3.5 years or so, the natural products industry. And yeah, it's the innovation in this space is nothing short of amazing. The show that we have upcoming, the Expo West, we're going to have over 90,000 people there. 90,000. This isn't like a consumer show. This is a business to business. It's going to be 90,000 B2B folks there, and about 3,100 exhibitors, 3,200 exhibitors, right? And we're expecting there to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 15 to 20,000 new items, products that are debuted at the show.
20,000 new items.
Yes,
15
new.
to 20. Wow.
Right, just at this one show.
It's like, how do you improve upon food? Like, I mean, what does that look like? Is it just food, or is it like the manufacturing?
Well,
how do you possibly get that many new items?
Well, the show encompasses food and beverage, so it's consumables. It also encompasses what we call like natural living, like everything from earth-friendly disposable dishware and things of that nature. So there's natural living products, and then there's a big component also that is nutraceuticals, supplements, vitamins. That's in there as well, right? The space we're in, which again we very loosely call the natural products industry, but it's the definition of natural has evolved, to a great degree. The exciting thing is, what we're seeing is you've got a generation of folks now who are receptive to what used to be fringe food movements, right? Like when I was a kid, none of these food movements were around, right? We ate what everybody else ate, mac and cheese and steak and,
Burgers.
Burgers. And in my case, from an Italian background, we had all of our carbohydrates. We had pasta 2 days a week, Thursdays and Sundays, and lots of bread. What we've seen is an evolution in terms of number one, the types of foods that are available, the nutrition profile of the foods and the beverages that are available, and most importantly, the consumer awareness about the role that food plays in our life, in our health, and the fact that we could, to some degree, manage our health based on what our intake, as you were saying earlier, what you put into your mouth, right? That's up to you, right? What you choose to eat, what you choose to drink. And what you choose to eat and drink has, ultimately big implications for your future health. Blood pressure, diabetes, controlling cholesterol, all those things, right? So what we're seeing is a renaissance now, where what used to be a fringe industry, that started about 40 years ago, largely the 1960s, 1970s is when the natural products industry was born. It was more or less born in Colorado. Our headquarters is in Boulder, Colorado. And in many of the founders of some of the companies we know and love, like Celestial Seasonings and folks like that, they came from that area. And these were, largely, hippies, ex-hippies who were looking for alternative ways to manage their lives, manage their health. They grew their own food in most cases, right? So fast forward now, that is an immense industry. This natural and organic products industry is gigantic. And what's really exciting is that it's being driven, and I never thought I would have seen this. I never thought this would have been the case 20 or 30 years ago. I never thought I'd see the day where Silicon Valley, which is, historically been known for exactly what its name implies, right? Technology development, and then all the financing, right? The capital structure that built up around the technology industry, right? What we now know as Silicon Valley and all the money there. There is now Silicon Valley money, investment money, venture capital money, routinely flowing into the food and beverage industry. I never thought I would, food and beverage was a sleepy industry, 1%, 2% growth, razor thin margins for decades, right? It was not a business most people wanted to invest in. Now, with the advent of technology, the state of technology, processing power being what it is now, the advent of big data and systems to manage big data, we actually have companies whose expressed desire is to protect the ecosystem, to protect nature, to improve our record on animal rights, and as an example, and to look at the food chain implications of all those things. So, for example, there are companies who are actively working to displace the chicken and the cow from our food system. In other words, alternative ways of producing an egg, alternative types of meat that act and taste and feel just like meat when it's going down when you're eating it, but is significantly healthier. And what they're looking at are plant-based alternatives to the chicken egg and to cows and sheep, plant-based alternatives. So and a lot of the innovation that's happening and the new product introductions we're talking about, many of them are based on plant-based sources, sustainable sources of protein. Historically, that protein has largely come from red meat, right? Or has largely come from eggs, which come from animals. And the U.S. has had a very bad track record in terms of animal rights abuses.
Industrial farming, yeah.
Industrial farming, industrial poultry, exactly. So you look at that architecture. Number one, they weren't the healthiest things in the world. Cholesterol concerns that come from eggs and that come from red meat. All the other things that come from red meat, as we've seen, it's not the healthiest thing to eat. So combine that with the animal rights concerns and the environmental concerns, because the amount of water it takes to produce a few ounces of beef is enormous, because you're maintaining these pastures of cows that have to be fed and housed and watered. And if you do the math on that and you look at the amount of resources, natural resources, especially water, fresh water it takes to produce the conventional foods that we've eaten, dairy-based, chicken, eggs, and red meat, it's extraordinarily wasteful. So a lot of the systems and where the Silicon Valley money is coming in is alternative production technologies, alternative ways of arriving at an egg, something that acts and looks and feels and tastes and cooks like an egg, but is much more healthier than an egg. And the same for red meat. So so we're seeing this convergence now of big data / technology, Silicon Valley financing, and the traditional food system. And up until the last few years, much of the innovation that we had seen was being driven by small companies, as we call them, tabletop entrepreneurs, startups. There's a fellow named Justin's Nut Butter, which was sold for something like $500 million this past year. Wow. Justin developed that nut butter when he was in college, and it was his personal blend that he used to have in his little refrigerator at college. And fast forward, he brought it to market. It was, incredibly successful, replacing traditional peanut butter. And it's commercially vast acceptance of it, to the point where one of the major food companies, purchased Justin's over the past year. And what we're seeing now, and this is the final leg of this story, And we, as a company, our company, New Hope Network, has always felt that in order to make the right kinds of foods, the right kinds of nutrition, cost effectively affordable to the masses, to the common man, if you will, ultimately to make that happen, there was going to have to be a coming together of the big food industry with the big retail industry, the conventional retail, Walmart, Target, et cetera, and the natural foods industry. For many years, they were separate and distinct entities, and big food didn't want to hear much about natural, and natural viewed big food as corporate America. They're going to try to change us.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
You even said how the word natural has changed meanings since then, and it has. Natural's not so natural anymore, right?
Natural has evolved significantly.
Yeah,
It has. And another term that's very commonly used now, sounds a little cliche, is real food, right? Sounds cliche. And any number of major food companies, top 10 food and beverage companies now, they're all talking about real food. And what they're saying is we need to get rid of artificial colors. We need to get rid of artificial flavors. We need to get rid of artificial sweeteners. We need to have, they call it clean label and simplification of the ingredients. We need to have a package where you read the ingredients and you don't have to know Latin to read the ingredients, right? These should be the ingredients that our grandmother used or that our ancestors used. It's kind of back to simplicity.
Yeah, 4-ingredient recipes are really big,
Exactly.
for cooking and all that stuff. Yeah, I see that in literature.
That's right.
Just four-ingredient recipes or 2 ingredients or whatever, bread.
You got it. That simplification, that we want to get back to something that is much more natural. So you're seeing now this massive push on by the major consumer packaged goods companies who are getting on board in a big way. In some cases, they're acquiring those startups.
Well,
right?
the big startups, and how about the established? Well, Amazon just bought Whole Foods.
Yes, yeah,
and that's huge. I mean, it's the epitome of what you're talking about, where technology money is intersecting with,
you got it,
the natural food movement, the hippies of the past. It's like those two worlds are merging right now.
That's right.
When you make that kind of stuff more accessible, I even see Walmart, the evil empire of Walmart starting to carry organic goods.
Absolutely.
And,
Yep.
Target. And
Yep.
I remember back in the day, I'm just talking 10 years ago, it was so hard to find an item like coconut oil,
Yes.
which has been proven over and over again to be such a healthy alternative or
Yep.
a healthy method of cooking. And
Yep.
I remember times grocery stores wouldn't carry it, but I would look in the cosmetic section of a Rite Aid or something, and that's where I would get coconut oil.
Wow.
But now it's common.
It's
you
front
see
and
that,
center.
right? And I think
Absolutely.
the kind of tying it all, wrapping it all together is what we're talking about politics, about technology, environment. There's this general consciousness that's moving towards a more, I'd like to say, a compassionate society and culture. And
Yes.
I think, events like this expo, that is part of the movement.
Yes. Yes.
The education, people like you who still have a strong grasp and are well-read on history to commentate on some of the current events and the things that are happening. You always need those elders, so to speak, to just kind of remind you, hey,
Yeah.
this stuff that happens to be the name of your podcast, this stuff that seems unprecedented
Yep.
isn't so unprecedented. Turn to page, so-and-so
right.
and read about Warren G. Hardie and
That's right.
the teapot scandal.
Yeah, there's often a historical parallel for much of what we're going through now. That's just the reality. And it pains me at times that, more people don't take an interest in history. I'm kind of obsessive about it. I get that, right? I'm overboard with, 1,000 volumes sitting out in my library, but
Right.
I just think that framework is so important. It gives you a context that you otherwise wouldn't have. And frankly, in a lot of cases, it takes the fear out of the equation, because sometimes we're confronted with something which is new to us in the here and now, and it can really scare you. If you have some historical context to put around it, some larger framework within which to cast it, the fear generally goes away, Because now you think, oh, I'm not the first one going through this. People have fought this battle before and won this battle, right?
Yeah, there's context.
There's context. I think it's critically important. And back to the ecological aspect of it. As an example, this year at Natural Product Expo West, we're having a collaboration. A climate collaborative symposium. We have a full day devoted to climate collaboration. So it's going to be bringing together all of the folks that are active in that realm regarding global warming, regarding climate change. Yeah, so we're paying particular attention to that. And back to your Amazon example, Jeff Bezos, now the richest man in the history of the world, is a major climate change activist. He's diametrically opposed to the current U.S. administration on climate change. So he's a good example, right? As progressive a technology guy as you'll see, literally the wealthiest guy in the history of this world, and he's intent on fighting climate change. He recognizes that it's real, right? So in similar fashion, our organization and kind of the ecosystem we operate within, this natural and organic products ecosystem, is extremely observant of the realities, the unquestioned reality of climate change, and where, unfettered, left unaddressed, where that might lead us. That issue is very central to a lot of the issues that our industry is working to remedy right now, is working to tackle.
Yeah, I think it is very important to know these historical moments and facts and things, and it goes beyond whatever side of the political line that we are on today.
It's a larger context,
and kind of bringing this all together. The importance of that. My wife and I, we just got back from a beautiful trip, and we went to Tulum, Mexico. Nice. And nice. It was the Maya Riviera area of Mexico, and we got to learn some history of the Mayans, the Mayan nice. Culture and society. Yep. Long before Republican Democrat right. was, we're talking about a great society to where technology recently, I think in 2012, with this new technology called LIDAR, LIDAR. It's kind of like a radar, okay? And they've been able to scan the forests and the Great Pyramids of Egypt. There's the pyramids of Central and South America as well. What I didn't know is, do you have any clue how many pyramids were constructed?
No, no.
I was shocked to where it was a whole lot more than I thought. Okay. With this new technology, they found 60,000 ancient structures. 60,000, which is mind-blowing.
That is mind-blowing. I was going to say like 30.
yeah. I was thinking to myself,
scary.
10. Yeah.
Oh, man.
And scary, exactly, because getting to the point of the story is that this was a great society for the time. The Mayan culture predates the Aztec culture by hundreds of years.
Yes.
But the fall was not the Mel Gibson Apocalypto movie.
Right, yeah.
And in fact, that's horrible. The guy we're talking to, he just said it's a great love story. That's it. But historically, that movie couldn't be further from the truth.
Wow.
But it wasn't the massive industrial sacrifices that were happening. Yes, they did have sacrifices, but it wasn't on that level. But it was interesting. The fall of the Mayan Empire, the Mayan culture, was environmental, because to build all of those structures, they needed
deforested.
They deforested.
Yeah, exactly.
And they kept cutting down and kept expanding to where the displacement of animals.
Right.
They changed the weather.
Yes.
And
yes.
That's when sacrifices happened more and more often, to where they didn't have the full grasp of what was going on, the destruction that they were causing.
Understood. Yep.
And it's amazing that is by far the most significant factor of the fall of the Mayan Empire.
That great culture, right?
Which had many more inhabitants than the Roman Empire. We're talking, Roman Empire had, I think it was like a million people, whereas the Mayan 60 million or something crazy. But it was insane.
Degrees greater, right?
But the message here is they didn't have a grasp of what they were doing with the environment, and it cost them. And here we are.
What a lesson, huh?
Yeah, and here we are today.
What a lesson. You know, one example, by the way, I should have mentioned this earlier. I don't know if I told you about this at all. One of the projects that we're working on right now is going to be just tremendous. We were approached about 3 years ago by a nonprofit organization that operates in Central and South America, and they came to my company, New Hope, and they have this particular superfruit that's largely native to the Amazon basin, much of it in Peru, and millions of hectares of this superfruit. 98% of which just dies on the vine because there's no market for it. The local people eat it, use it, but most of it just goes back into the ground. And they came to us and said, we're concerned about deforestation. We're concerned about the logging and the folks that are coming into these ancient preserves and cutting down the trees, right? And their theory was this fruit is wonderful fruit. It's high in antioxidants. It's extremely nutritious, just amazing superfruit. Their thought was, could we create a U.S. market for this superfruit? And the theory being that if we used the superfruit productively for commerce purposes, and then the money flowed back to the native peoples who are harvesting the fruits, that would then give them an incentive to protect the forest, not take the tree down, let the tree live because it's bearing the fruit. And then that becomes, that translates into economic, prosperity for them. So we did a U.S. market assessment of the as to whether the U.S. market would like this superfruit. Would the U.S. market embrace it? Should it be incorporated into a food product, a beverage product, and so on and so on? So long story short, our study came up very rosy. There's a potentially a large market for the superfruit. So fast forward now 3 years, we're now working with a Peruvian-based beverage manufacturer who has gone under contract and wants to introduce a line of superfruit-infused natural beverages to the U.S. market. And we are actively working with them. It's been in development for about 6 or 9 months now. And later in 2018, we're going to bring a line of these beverages to the U.S. market in a very large way. And it's very likely we're going to start with an e-commerce component, perhaps through Amazon itself. Amazon it ties in very, very elegantly.
Right.
And to your point earlier about changing the weather by cutting down the trees, the carbon deposits that this forest, this part of the Amazon, the carbon deposits that it's protecting, it's the largest carbon deposit in the world. So if this preserve were deforested to any significant degree, the carbon emissions into the atmosphere would be such that it would rapidly increase the devastation of global warming.
Oh, wow.
So by preserving the trees and thereby preserving the carbon deposits and preventing it from going into the atmosphere, we are not only giving a lifestyle and an income to the indigenous peoples and helping them to preserve their way of life, we're also protecting against future environmental damage by protecting those carbon emissions. The preserve that these fruits are in are by far the largest natural preserve in the world. It's the largest natural or truly organic, untouched by human hands. It's the largest organic and natural preserve in the world, and it's protecting carbon deposits that would be materially negatively impact climate change if they were released. So that's an example where you look at the natural products industry, it's good, natural, it's good for my body. Mm-hmm. Not only good for my body, in this case, it's nutritious and beneficial for those who consume it. It's good for the environment, and it's good for those indigenous peoples who really didn't have income streams, many of whom were destitute. So that's another example of all those pieces kind of coming together very elegantly.
Yeah, to a higher consciousness.
Yes, most definitely.
Well, Mr. Mallardi, how can people get more information about the Natural Food Expos, or how can people become more involved? Because it's really an industry-only event, right?
It largely is, yeah. Mm-hmm. Our events are largely, B2B, business-to-business events, as we say. So most of the folks that are there, we'll probably have, 150, 200 people from Whole Foods there, and so on and so on.
So support your local, grocer kind of thing. Or...
Yeah, yes, and to your point earlier, your local grocer has changed because here's an example: Costco now sells more organic than Whole Foods.
Oh wow!
Costco,
Wow.
Super Value, the grocery chain, does $1.5 billion a year, and they're a major middle America grocery chain. $1.5 billion a year of organic. Target and Walmart now have gotten into natural and organic in a very big way. So the good news is it's now cost effective, right? They used to say, like my wife would love to shop, purely organic. She doesn't, just because it's been so premium priced all these years, right? We didn't want to put our whole paycheck down for organic food.
Right.
Now it's much more cost effectively available because these mainstream retailers are carrying it. So yeah, I would say, clearly do your homework into the various diet fads that are out there. Some of these diet trends are really significantly beneficial for people's health, and people really do have the opportunity now to manage their health creatively by number one, understanding what their food is comprised of, and number two, altering their diet. And essentially, being patrons of Whole Foods and Sprouts and all these other retailers now that are making the right kinds of foods available, support them, with your dollars, no question.
And how can people keep in contact with historical factoids from you?
Well, one thing is my Unprecedented podcast. The purpose of Unprecedented, to your point earlier, is to present the events of today through the lens of history. And we've started with politics, but we're going to be branching out into other aspects of today's world and always framing it out in the context of what's gone before, giving historical parallels for that. So yeah, future episodes of Unprecedented, please make an effort to take a look.
Awesome. All right, Mr. Mallardi. Oh, and how are your Jets going to be looking next year?
Oh, man.
sorry to bring up a sore subject.
Man, yeah, that's talk about ending on a sour note.
Hey,
I am a lifetime Jets and Mets fan. I don't care what you say.
I talked to Sammy the Greek
Yep.
from our, I talked to him, and he's a diehard Steelers fan.
I have a soft spot for the Steelers. I do.
And
Real soft spot.
I was asking him how he felt about this year. Is it worse because they got so close?
I know.
Or would you just rather they, he says it's worse that they got as far as they did, not to do anything with it. And he's an Oklahoma fan. So in college, he got he
got double dip on that one. Oh, that's rough.
It's a rough year for him, and he fell out of the puddle because he was sick of getting his ass kicked on every end, because he was telling me about his fantasy football leagues as well.
I will say, as a Jets fan, I couldn't have been happier about that Super Bowl outcome. I will say that much.
Right.
That was a happy day for me.
All right, Mr. Mallardi, it's been a pleasure, and look forward to doing more of this in the future with you.
My pleasure. Thank you, Jim.
All right, you got it. We hope that you enjoyed this episode of Conversations with Cool People and would like to thank the sponsors that help make this happen. If you enjoyed this podcast, support it by clicking that subscribe button, and support the businesses that support us by using the links provided in the description below. You can also visit www.conversationswithcoolpeople.com, where you can also subscribe to us on iTunes and SoundCloud and keep updated on all of our latest episodes and appearances. Go there and subscribe. It's free.